I'll begin with an invocation, a Vedic invocation, which is my practice, and this is our tradition in India. Om Ano Bhadraha Kratavo Yantu Vishvato Dabdhaso Aparitasa Udbhidaha Devano Yatha Sadamidbridhe Asanna Prayuvo Rakshitaro Dive Dive.
इसका मतलब भी बता दीजिए.
Yeah, I am translating for you. May noble thoughts come to us from all sides, such thoughts which are never failing and elevating, and which inspire works that come without compulsion. May all the divine forces grant us protection day after day without any obstruction in our progress. So this is a universal prayer, as are most of the prayers in the four Vedas, which are our most ancient literature. Respected Chair Dr. Gupta, dear Professor Sujit Datta, respected General Sani, and our young friends in the ICCR delegation, we are delighted to have you amongst us for sharing and discussing India's democratic experience. I am grateful to Dr. Gupta for giving me this opportunity to present a brief introduction of India's cultural heritage in this respect. Last time because I am basically a student of Indian philosophy, so last time I discussed a few points from the philosophical point of view. Today I'll try to dig out certain features of India's polity. But I must admit at the outset that I have drawn heavily from a book by Sri Aurobindo titled Foundations of Indian Culture, where he has written 4 chapters on Indian polity. Culture, as we all know, is derived from a French term which in turn is rooted in the Latin colere, signifying to tend to the earth and grow, cultivate and nurture. It shares the etymology with a number of other words related to actively fostering growth. Indian culture is holistic in nature and it encompasses all that is refined and valuable in our tradition: history, philosophy, religion, art, architecture, literature, and last but not the least, polity and governance. And as Dr. Gupta has already hinted, that Indian culture is so vast, India itself is so vast and variegated. There are so many religions, so many languages, so many ethnic identities, different types of people speak different languages, they come from different types of places, wear different clothes, eat different foods, but all said and done, there is an inherent unity amongst all the Indians, wherever they are living and coming from, whatever language they are speaking, but they are all tied through a bond, and which bond is the Indianness, the bond of Indianness. And that Indianness comes to us from our ancient culture, which is very rich and deep. It means that Indian culture is the first and foremost in the world, and it's universal in approach, since it has certain values which are eternally relevant for the whole world, especially from the point of view of democracy. It will be my endeavor to present a few significant points which are the foundation of Indian culture and make it a vibrant and participatory experience for all human beings. Democracy, as we understand it today, it is from a Greek term, demos means people and kratos means rule. It is a form of government in which the people have an authority to choose their rulers and to deliberate and decide about the rules for governing. Although the meaning and scope of democracy has changed considerably over time and in different countries, but there are certain inherent and broad parameters in Indian polity which can guide and help humanity across the globe, such as follows. In ancient times, as we all know, it was a form of direct democracy, while nowadays it is a representative democracy. But Indian polity, Indian democracy, since ancient times, I should say since Vedic times, is governed by dharma. Dharma is the central point of Indian democracy. And the connotation of this term dharma is so wide that it cannot be explained in 1 hour, what to say of 10 minutes. So I just leave the nature of dharma, but this is the overriding concept of democracy in India. In ancient Indian system, as elsewhere, it was the king or the monarch who was at the helm of government, but he was held to be the representative of divine power and guardian of dharma. In the famous drama Shakuntala, the well-known poet, Sanskrit poet Kalidasa, mentions the throne of King Dushyanta as Dharmasana. He is riding the Dharmasana, the throne of Dharma. So king is the custodian of Dharma, his throne is the throne of Dharma and not Singhasana. Nowadays, in later times, it was known as Singhasana. But in ancient Indian tradition, it was Dharmasana, and king was supposed to rule according to the Dharma. Dharma is the universal law, the cosmic orders. Dushyanta himself, the king Dushyanta, in another episode, he proclaims, which is very important from the point of view of democratic experience. He says, some rich person has died in his kingdom, and the wife is a widow now. She doesn't have any issue. She is alone. But Dushyanta proclaims, Yena yena viyujyante prajaha snigdhena bandhuna sa papadrite tasam Dushyanta iti ghusyatam. All my people must know that King Dushyanta is there and he is the relative, he is the friend in need. Except the evil type of relations, all other relations will be maintained by the king himself if somebody is bereaved of any near and dear ones. This was the king. Obviously, king was held to be a custodian of law and a father figure for his people. The very term praja for people. The masses were known as praja and king was known as raja. So raja and praja had the same relation as a father and his progeny has. And the very term praja means progeny. So just as a divine power or God and the human beings share a relation of father and son, similarly the king and his people, they share a relationship of father and son or daughter. In fact, Kalidasa uses the very term Lokatantra. In Sanskrit or Hindi, the term for democracy is Janatantra, Prajatantra or Lokatantra. Kalidasa uses the term Lokatantra, which is a Sanskrit synonym for democracy, when he says that there is no place for resting in a democratic kingdom. Avishramoyam Lokatantradhikaraha. And I would like to quote from the Rig Veda, which is the oldest available literary document. And the Rig Veda has many references which are there to prove that the king was elected by the people. It says, Tvam Visho Vrinutam Rajyaya. May the people choose you for ruling. Then there is Vishastva Sarva Vanchantu Ma Tvadrashtram Adhibhrashat. Visha means people. Praja and Visha is the same. The ruler must not only be elected by the people, but also be acceptable to the people. Indrosi Vishauja. Your strength lies in your people. Vishauja. Visha is people. Oja is your strength. Another verse, Yoga Kshemam cha adaya aham bhuyansa muttamaha. May I become a good king, a very good king, so that I protect the yoga and kshema, the welfare of my people. So it shows and it demonstrates that in Indian tradition, the king was a constitutional monarch with limited personal power and more of a general supervision and control over the good order and welfare of the community. The sovereign powers of the king were under a direct control of dharma or spiritual authority of a rishi like council, sage, revered and consulted by the king. You see, in the kingdom, the king was the ruler, he was a kshatriya, but there was an amatya or mantri who was a rishi like or sage like, a saintly person, very wise person, like we have in Ramayana Vasishtha. In Mahabharata, we have Vidura, or later on, we have Chanakya. And I would like to quote Sri Aurobindo here. He says, a greater sovereign than the king was the dharma, the religious, ethical, social, political, juridic, and customary law, organically governing the life of the people. This impersonal authority was considered sacred and eternal in its spirit and the totality of its body, always characteristically the same, the changes organically and spontaneously brought about in its actual form by the evolution of the society being constantly incorporated in it, regional, family, and other customs, forming a sort of attendant and subordinate body capable of change only from within and not from the above. With the dharma, no secular authority had any right of autocratic interference. Unquote. There was a strong democratic element, if we must use the Western terms, in Indian polity, and even institutions that present a certain analogy to the parliamentary form, but in reality, these features were of India's own kind and not at all the same thing as modern parliaments and modern democracy. And so, considered, they are a much more remarkable evidence of the political capacity of Indian people in their living adaptation to the ensemble of social mind and body of the nation. Then, when we judge them by the very different standard of Western society and the peculiar needs of its cultural cycle. As I said earlier, in the ancient Indian tradition, a king was supposed to be a self-disciplined person. First, he had to rule himself. Chanakya says in his Arthashastra, Kritsnam idam shastram indriya jayah. Whole of my treatise is based on controlling the sense organs by the king himself. A person working for the welfare of his people rather than seeking his own personal comfort. And Chanakya goes on to say, Praja sukhe sukham rajyah, prajanam cha hite hitam, natma priyam hitam rajyah, prajanam tu priyam hitam. The happiness of the king lies in the welfare of his people and not in his own pleasures. At this place, I would like to mention that Ananda K. Kumaraswamy, a great scholar, he has written a book, Spiritual Authority and Temporal Power in the Indian Theory of Government. And he says, autonomy, as we have seen, being the outward tally of an inward self-control. It is one thing to be free to do what we like. And that is what we understand by freedom today. But this is only to have victory over pleasures. To be really free is to have a victory over pleasures and not being free to do what we like. So what we like to do and we start doing, that is not actual freedom. Freedom, real freedom, comes from having victory over our pleasures. And that is what a king was supposed to do in the Chanakyan view as well. The deeply rich and profoundly spiritual culture of ancient India suggests that there was always a participatory pattern of polity and governance in which common people had an important role not only in selection of the king but also in maintaining social solidarity and communitarian welfare. Right from the Rig Veda, we have such ideals and such proclamations. Likewise, in Atharva Veda, it is clearly mentioned that the people elect their king for running the kingdom. Tvam Visho Vrinutam Rajyaya. Besides this, we have different types of councils and committees, and we have terms Samiti, which was a people's assembly, Sabha, a council, Vidatha, Samana, Gana, and Janapada. These are the different types of groups and communities for governing different types of rules. In our Vedic literature, we have all these terms besides our epics and Dharma Shastra. There is a Rigvedic statement, Brihad Vadema Vidathe Suviraha, means may we speak aloud with brave people in the assembly. Vidatha is the assembly of scholars. So may we speak aloud in the assembly of scholars. The highly spiritual Indian mind had evolved a strong socio-religious system in which all sections of society could participate and contribute their bit. Sessions of yajnas, satras, and sadas. Different types of religious conglomerations, yajna, satra, and sadas. The kings used to organize these sessions. These were the conferences actually for people's participation. These were held at the kingdom as well as at the hermitages of rishis and saints. Common people could get knowledge directly from the people who had assembled there. So this was a method for dissemination of knowledge among the masses. It is also worth mentioning that originally the four orders of society that the Indian system of Varnas has, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra, they were meant for a balanced and smooth functioning of society. But eventually they grew into a fixed social hierarchy that each one of them had. A social dignity, an ethical honor, an appropriate education, and a place of duty and right in the society. Mind you, duty comes first and right comes later in Indian approach. More importantly, women in ancient India, contrary to their position in other cultures, were not denied a respectable position and adequate civil rights. In brief, it can be said that in Indian culture there was and still is an organic relation between the individual and community, Vyashti and Samashti. None can sustain without the other. An individual cannot live alone, and a society is nothing but a group of people. So, the individual and society, both of them have to strengthen each other for their own growth. The only difference is that the modern Western mind looks at both of these from a rights-oriented viewpoint, while the Indian mind was more concerned with the obligatory side of it. Therefore, the ideas like Swadharma, Swabhava, and Yuga Dharma were predominantly expounded in our literature. Only yesterday evening, our Prime Minister inaugurated a very beautiful portion of the Central Vista, and it was renamed as Kartavya Patha. From Rajapatha, the King's Way, it was King's Way, but now it has become Kartavya Patha, the road to duty. So duty, obligation was of prominent place in our tradition. It is also a matter of great concern that even in Indian scenario, age-old values of mutual care and concern, sharing and offering, sacrifice and compassion are deteriorating due to oppressive onslaught of Western consumerist culture. We have to reacquaint ourselves and our future generations with the inherent principles of our ancient Indian social polity and its underlying ideas, which were based on the system of self governing democratic bodies. And with these words, I would like to stop, and I am open for discussion. But I would like to say that the Prime Minister, in his speech yesterday, he spoke of the past of India, a democratic past. He said, Lokatantratmak Atit. This is the word he used. And also the cultural infrastructure that the Indian government is trying to build up. The cultural infrastructure. Culture of India is so wide and so varied that it is not possible to capture it in such a short period. But today I have tried to pinpoint certain ideas of Indian polity, which is just a fraction of India's rich and glorious culture. Thank you.